Turn these stones into bread if you are so powerful. The millionaire laughed, but Jesus Christ taught him a lesson. The words landed like a slap across the polished oak table, echoing through the glass-walled boardroom, 40 floors above downtown Chicago. 5 smooth gray stones, decorative, imported, absurdly expensive, sat arranged in a neat line where quarterly reports should have been. Graham Whitmore, billionaire CEO of Whitmore Bread Co., leaned back in his leather chair, a thin smile curling at the corner of his mouth. To him, this was entertainment, a break from numbers, margins, and domination. Across the table, executives shifted uncomfortably. Some chuckled on cue. Others glanced at their phones already recording. This was the kind of moment that went viral: power mocking, humility, wealth, daring faith. The marketing chief adjusted her angle to capture the best shot. The CFO swallowed hard, sensing something was off, but not knowing why. The man standing opposite them did not reach victim. He wore simple clothes almost out of place against the steel and glass opulence. His hands bore the marks of labor, not boardrooms. He looked neither angry nor afraid. His eyes moved slowly from face to face as if seeing each person fully, and that more than anything unsettled the room. Outside, the city moved as always. Traffic pulsed, phones buzzed. Somewhere below, people waited in line at soup kitchens, only blocks from a company that destroyed tons of bread every week. None of that mattered to Graham Whitmore in that moment. What mattered was proving a point that power belonged to those who owned it, that miracles were for children and fools. "Go on," someone muttered, half joking, half cruel. But the silence stretched. Then the man in white spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a calm that cut through the room. He did not answer the challenge. He did not perform. Instead, his gaze settled on Graham, and something in that look made the billionaire's smile falter for the briefest second. In that instant, laughter died. Phones trembled in hands. A truth heavy, unwelcome, impossible to ignore, pressed in on every corner of the room. Because this was not a test of power, it was a test of the heart. And before a single stone could be touched, before a single miracle could be demanded, the lesson had already begun, one that would expose secrets, shatter empires, and force a choice no amount of money could undo. What happened next would leave a room full of powerful people silent and change one man's eternity forever. Before we continue, take a moment, like the video, subscribe to Jesus Christ Encounters, and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. By daylight, Whitmore Bread Co. looked like an American success story carved in steel and glass. From the outside, the headquarters rose over downtown Chicago, like a monument to efficiency, clean lines, reflective windows, a flag snapping crisply in the wind. Every morning, delivery trucks rolled out in perfect rhythm, carrying loaves stamped with a familiar logo into supermarkets, schools, cafes, and corporate cafeterias across the Midwest. To most people, that logo meant comfort, warm kitchens, family tables, the simple promise that bread would be there when the day demanded strength. Inside the production plants, the smell was unmistakable. Fresh bread, yeasty, golden, comforting, filled the air from before dawn until late into the night. It clung to uniforms, hair, and skin. Workers went home smelling like ovens, and flour carrying the scent into buses and apartment hallways. To anyone passing by, it smelled like life itself. But beneath that smell, something else lived. On the factory floors, inspectors moved quickly, clipboards in hand, eyes trained not on hunger, but on appearance. A loaf too pale, a roll slightly misshapen, a batch with air bubbles that broke the illusion of perfection. None of it was spoiled, none of it unsafe to eat, at least not on the surface. Still red stickers went on pallets by the ton. Rejected, destroyed, logged as loss. At corporate meetings, the numbers were recited without emotion. Waste was calculated into profit. Destruction was cheaper than generosity. The logic was clean, modern, airtight. Donate the imperfect, and customers might question the brand. Allow mercy, and margins might soften. In this world, efficiency was the highest virtue. Far from the boardroom in neighborhoods only a few miles away, different mornings unfolded. Shelters rationed meals. Food banks stretched supplies thinner each week. Parents skipped breakfast so children could eat cereal with water instead of milk. The distance between abundance and need was measured not in miles, but in indifference. On the executive floors, those realities never intruded. Coffee machines hissed. Screens glowed with expansion maps and quarterly targets. Whitmore Breadcohen was preparing to move into new states, new markets, new contracts with government programs that promised stability and scale. Bread was not just food anymore. It was leverage. And yet in quiet corners of the same empire, something was rotting. In a private office with the blinds always half closed, nutritional shakes replaced meals. A man who controlled hundreds of thousands of loaves each day could not swallow a single bite of solid bread without pain. Doctors' visits were scheduled between meetings. Files were locked away. Weakness was hidden the way defects were hidden out of sight, out of mind. No one spoke of it openly. They spoke instead of growth, of dominance, of brand purity. The smell of bread continued to rise warm and reassuring, masking the truth that the system producing it was slowly poisoning more than bodies. It was dulling consciences, training hearts to see food as a weapon and people as expendable. So when a quiet request for bread was logged at reception that morning, simple human inconvenient, it felt like an interruption. A minor annoyance, something to be handled quickly and dismissed. No one yet understood that the smell of bread, so carefully cultivated to suggest life was about to expose a trail of suffering, and that the same symbol used to build an empire would soon stand as evidence against it. The stage was set long before anyone spoke of stones or miracles. The ovens were already burning, the waste bins were already full, and unseen by most, death was already hiding beneath the fragrance of fresh bread. Graham Whitmore cultivated perfection the way others cultivated virtue. It was visible in the cut of his suits, the precision of his speech, the silence he demanded before he spoke. In meetings, he did not raise his voice. He did not need to. A single look, cool, assessing final, was enough to end debates and careers alike. To shareholders and the press, he was discipline incarnate, the son of a modest baker who had turned grit into billions. The embodiment of the American promise, if you refined the process enough, controlled every variable you could eliminate failure itself. Interviews praised his uncompromising standards. Business schools dissected his strategy. Few noticed how often the word people disappeared from his explanations. Inside Whitmore Bread Co., perfection was enforced with ritual. Each morning began with reports stacked in exact alignment. Numbers were expected to be clean-rounded, obedient. Deviations, whether in product or personnel, were treated as contamination. A loaf could be flawless in taste and nutrition, but if its curve displeased the eye, it was unworthy. The same rule applied to workers who slowed, questioned, or aged out of usefulness. Supervisors learned quickly what earned approval. Efficiency became code for silence. Quality control meant disposal without discussion. When managers suggested donation partnerships or employee food programs, the ideas were not debated. They were erased. The explanation was always the same: mercy-diluted excellence. On the factory floors, workers watched pallets marked for destruction roll past them day after day. Bread that still radiated warmth, bread that smelled like home bread that could have fed neighborhoods. They were trained not to look at it too long. Looking led to questions. Questions led to trouble. In the executive suite, those pallets existed only as percentages. Loss allowances, necessary waste. A line item justified by brand protection. When someone dared to say the word hungry, it landed in the room like profanity. Hunger was a failure of planning. Graham insisted not a moral concern. He believed this deeply. The world as he saw it was a hierarchy of discipline. Those at the top had mastered control over systems, over outcomes, over themselves. Those below simply had not. Compassion, in his view, was a dangerous indulgence, a weakness that blurred lines and invited chaos. And yet the cruelty was never loud. It lived in policies written in neutral language, in termination letters that cited performance alignment, in severance packages designed to look generous while ensuring silence, in contracts that shifted risk downward and profit upward. No single act could be pointed to as evil. That was the brilliance of it. Everything was clean, legal, approved. Those closest to him sensed it but rarely named it. Some admired the clarity. Others feared the cost of dissent. A few told themselves that the system worked, that benefits trickled down eventually. It was easier than acknowledging that perfection had become an excuse to discard human beings, the way imperfect loaves were discarded efficiently, quietly, without remorse. Graham himself never thought of it as cruelty. To him it was order. an order he believed was proof of worth. So when a man arrived asking for bread, not as a business proposal, not as a tax strategy, but as a request for hungry children, it struck at the core of everything Graham had built. Not because it threatened his resources, but because it challenged his creed. Perfection had always protected him from seeing consequences, but that protection was fragile. And beneath the polished surface of control, something in him had already begun to crack, long before the stones were placed on the table, long before his laughter echoed through the room. The antagonist was not born in that moment. He had been perfected into being. Behind the polished image of Whitmore Bread Co., a quieter reality unfolded, one that never appeared in annual reports or glossy interviews. While ovens roared and trucks delivered warmth to millions of tables, the man at the center of the empire lived on silence and liquid. In a private office tucked behind the executive suite, the blinds were often drawn, not for secrecy but for control. Light made the nausea worse. So did the smell of bread. Every morning, an assistant placed a stainless steel bottle on Graham Whitmore's desk. Inside was a pale green nutritional drink, carefully measured, clinically balanced. It was the only thing his body could tolerate. No crust, no crumb, no bite of the product that carried his name across the country. He drank it slowly, as if timing could tame pain. Doctors' visits were arranged between board meetings, never during. Diagnoses were spoken in low voices, charts turned away from curious eyes. The word terminal was never used aloud. Instead, there were phrases like, manage the symptoms and focus on quality of life. To Graham, those words sounded like surrender. He dismissed them with the same efficiency he dismissed anything that threatened his sense of command. What no one in the company knew, not fully, was how long it had been since he'd eaten bread. 8 months passed without a single solid meal, then 9, then more. Each attempt ended the same way: burning pain, cold sweats, blood, where food should have been. The body refused what the empire produced in abundance. It was as if something inside him rejected the symbol he had twisted. At executive tastings, he lifted glasses of imported water, while others praised texture and flavor. He nodded at the right moments, memorized descriptions from reports, and maintained the illusion. The king of bread could not be seen as weak, not in a system built on dominance. At night, alone in his penthouse, the illusion collapsed. Pain crept in when distractions faded. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the dull ache that radiated outward from his core. Sometimes he stared at the ceiling and thought of his father's hands dusted with flour, breaking warm loaves to share with neighbors who couldn't pay. Back then, bread had meant survival, community, grace. Now it meant contracts, waste calculations, and control. The irony never escaped him. It haunted him. He could feed cities, yet starved at his own table. He commanded ovens that ran without rest, yet his own body shut down piece by piece. In meetings, he spoke of perfection. In private, he lived with a truth no standard could fix. The machine he built no longer served him. And still he tightened his grip, because admitting the cost would mean admitting fault, and fault would unravel everything. It would force him to confront the possibility that the suffering around him and within him shared a common source. So he hid. He compensated. He demanded more discipline from others as his own control slipped. The empire had to remain flawless, even if the man at its center was decaying. By the time the request for donated bread crossed his desk, Graham Whitmore was already losing a battle he refused to name. The body that could not swallow bread was sending a message the mind would not receive. The tragedy was not that the king of bread could not eat his own product. It was that he did not yet understand why. And when the man in white would soon speak that truth aloud, it would not arrive as condemnation, but as revelation. The request entered the building quietly, the way human need often does, without urgency, without drama, easily ignored. It arrived as a note from reception, printed on plain paper, slipped into the daily stack of interruptions executives preferred not to notice. A man was waiting downstairs. He asked about donated bread. The assistant hesitated before passing the message along. Requests like this usually died at the lobby. Policies handled them. Security redirected them. But something about this one lingered. The man had not raised his voice. He had not pleaded. He had simply said he represented Providence Children's Home, and that 40 children had gone 3 days without bread after their supplier shut down. When the message reached the executive floor, it drew mild amusement. Another charity case. Another moral appeal dressed as logistics. Graham Whitmore listened with half an ear as he skimmed reports, then looked up slowly, eyes narrowing, not in irritation, but interest. "Send him up," he said at last. A pause. "Let's hear this one." 5 minutes later, the elevator doors opened onto a world that did not belong to the man who stepped out. He wore simple clothes, linen-worn shoes, no watch. His hands bore calluses not from gyms or golf clubs, but from work. He moved without haste, as if time did not pressure him. The glass, the marble, the view of the city below, none of it impressed or intimidated him. Executives looked up from their seats. Some smiled politely, others smirked. Cameras stayed hidden for now. "Good afternoon," the man said calmly. His voice carried without effort. "Thank you for seeing me." Graham leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. He studied the visitor the way one evaluates a product sample weight, finish, usefulness. "You're here about bread," he said flatly. "Yes," the man replied. "For children." That single word shifted the room. Not enough to change minds, but enough to sharpen attention. The man explained simply. 40 children, orphans, breakfasts stretched thinner each day. All he needed was 100 pounds of bread per week. Not premium, not branded, just edible. Imperfect was fine. The amount was negligible, less than what the company discarded in minutes. Silence followed, not because the request was unreasonable, but because it exposed how small the distance was between abundance and mercy. A distance no one in that room wanted to cross. Graham's lips curved into a thin smile. He gestured toward the windows, the city, the empire below. "You know how much bread we destroy every week?" he asked casually. "Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth." The man nodded. "That's why I came." A few executives shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. Another checked his phone. "You see," Graham continued, tone light, "if we give away what doesn't meet our standards, people begin to wonder what those standards really are." The man listened without interruption. There was no argument in his posture, no desperation, only patience. "Children don't ask for standards," he said softly. "They ask for food." The room stiffened, not because the words were loud, but because they were true. For the first time since he'd entered, Graham felt something unexpected: resistance. Not defiance, something quieter, something that refused to bend. This was not a negotiation. It was not a pitch. It was not leverage. It was a small request that carried the weight of something far larger. And though no one yet recognized it, the presence standing before them had already begun to expose hearts by asking for almost nothing at all. The mood in the boardroom shifted the moment Graham Whitmore decided the meeting would no longer be polite. What had begun as a request became in his hands a performance. He rose from his chair and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing down at the manicured plaza far below. His reflection hovered in the glass, sharp, suit-controlled posture, a man accustomed to winning every room he entered. Then his eyes fell on the decorative stones lining the indoor garden just outside the conference hall. An idea took shape, cruel and elegant. "Ethan," he said without turning, "bring me a few of those stones. The gray ones. The ones shaped like rolls." The COO hesitated, confused, then complied. Minutes later, 5 smooth stones were placed carefully on the conference table, their oval forms unmistakably similar to bread loaves. The symbolism was obvious. So was the intent. Graham arranged them himself, aligning them with ceremonial precision. When he finally looked up, his smile had hardened into something colder. "You're a religious man, aren't you?" he asked the visitor lightly. "You believe in miracles." The man in white did not answer immediately. He simply stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes steady. Graham's voice grew louder, performative now. "Then let's make this simple." He slid the stones forward across the polished surface. "Turn these stones into bread." A beat. "If your God cares so much about hungry children," Graham continued, "why don't you stop asking for my product and let him provide laughter?" Rippled across the room, sharp and eager. It spread quickly, executives joining in like a chorus that knew its cue. Phones came out. Someone whispered, "This is gold." Another adjusted the angle to catch the man's face. The marketing chief smiled as she hit record. This would play well online. Power exposing faith, logic humiliating belief. The billionaire as rational hero. Go on, someone muttered. Pray. Do your thing. The stones sat there inert and mocking. The man in white did not reach for them. He did not close his eyes. He did not bow his head. He did not rise to the bait. Instead, he looked at Graham, truly looked at him. And something in that gaze unsettled the room more than any shouted miracle ever could. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was sorrow. The laughter thinned. Graham felt it too, though he couldn't explain why. He cleared his throat, irritated by the silence. What's wrong, he pressed. Can't do it or won't. Still the man did nothing. Around the table, confidence wavered. One executive shifted in his seat. Another lowered his phone slightly as if unsure whether he should keep filming. The stones suddenly felt heavier, their presence less amusing. This was no longer a joke. The trap had been set, carefully designed to force humiliation, to prove that faith collapses when challenged by power. Graham had used the oldest tactic of all: demand a spectacle, then mock the absence of one. But the trap misfired, because the refusal to perform did not weaken the man in white. It exposed something else entirely: how desperate the room was to feel superior, how much effort it took to drown out a truth no one wanted to face. The stones remained stones. And in that stillness, before a single word was spoken, it became clear that the challenge was never about bread. It was about who had the authority to define worth, and who in the end was truly on trial. The silence that followed the laughter was not empty. It was heavy, pressing in from every side, settling over the boardroom like a weight no one had planned for. Jesus Christ did not touch the stones. He did not raise his hands. He did not speak of fire from heaven or invoke power for spectacle. Instead, he let the room feel its own noise fading away. Phones lowered one by one. Smiles stiffened. Breath slowed. The performance Graham Whitmore had orchestrated suddenly felt unfinished, exposed. Then Jesus Christ spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically. His voice carried the calm certainty of something already decided. How many days has it been, he asked, eyes resting on Graham, since you last tasted your own bread? The question landed wrong, not as an insult, as a fact. A few executives exchanged glances, confused. Graham's smile flickered. That's none of your business, he replied quickly, too quickly. Jesus Christ did not argue. He continued as if reading a ledger no one else could see. 8 months, he said. 17 days. The room stilled. Graham's breath caught. Color drained from his face so fast that even those farthest from the table noticed. Someone laughed nervously, then stopped when no one joined in. You built an empire on bread, Jesus Christ went on. Yet your stomach can no longer receive it. You produce hundreds of thousands of loaves a day, but you survive on liquid because solid food tears you apart. A chair scraped softly as someone shifted back. Graham's hands tightened on the edge of the table. Who told you that he demanded? My doctor. My files are private. No one told me, Jesus Christ answered. Your body did. He took a step forward, not threatening, not aggressive, simply present. Stage 4 gastric cancer, he said gently. Diagnosed after the bleeding wouldn't stop. No cure, only management. Morphine when the pain spikes. Silence when the fear does. The words did not echo. They sank. The CFO stared at the floor. The marketing chief froze, phones still recording, unsure whether to stop. The COO whispered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer he hadn't used in years. Graham shook his head. This is impossible, he said, but the conviction was gone. You're guessing. Jesus Christ's gaze did not waver. You hide the bottle under your desk, he continued. Green, measured, your only meal. Graham staggered back a step. The truth had been spoken aloud, and with it the illusion cracked. He had ruled this room for years, yet now stood exposed by a stranger who had not raised his voice once. This Jesus Christ said softly, is why I did not turn stones into bread. He glanced at the table, not at the stones, but at the faces around it. You asked for a miracle to be impressed, but miracles are not tricks. They are revelations. No one laughed now. No one moved. You already live with one, he continued. A warning written into your flesh. The bread you refuse to share has become the bread you cannot eat. Graham's mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time, power did not answer him back. Jesus Christ had not performed. He had told the truth. And in that moment, the room understood something terrifying and undeniable. The real miracle was not what he could turn stones into, but what he had just turned the room into. A place where lies could no longer breathe. The room had not yet recovered from the truth about Graham's body when Jesus Christ continued. The silence was brittle now, one wrong word away from shattering. "You think your sin is waste," he said calmly. "You think it is throwing bread away while others go hungry." A few executives nodded instinctively, relieved. Waste could be quantified. Waste could be debated. Waste could be justified. Jesus Christ shook his head. "That is not your greatest crime." He turned slightly as if addressing the room rather than the man alone. "Waste is visible. It offends the eyes. But what you have done goes deeper. You did not merely discard bread." He paused. "You poisoned it." The word struck harder than any accusation before it. Vanessa's phone slipped from her fingers and hit the table with a dull sound. The CFO's lips parted, but no voice came out. Someone whispered, "That's not true, though." No one could say who. Graham forced a laugh that collapsed halfway through. "That's absurd," he said. "We meet federal standards. We pass inspections." "You paid for those inspections," Jesus Christ replied, not harshly, but with certainty. 7 years ago, when margins tightened and expansion demanded shortcuts. Graham's eyes widened, not in anger now but fear. "Industrial bleaching agents." Jesus Christ continued. "Texture enhancers never approved for food. Trace metals that harden dough and shorten baking time." Each phrase landed like a verdict. You told yourself the quantities were small. You told yourself no one would notice. You told yourself efficiency justified the risk. The COO sank back into his chair. He remembered the memos, the altered reports, the instructions to reroute samples before audits. He had signed them. Graham's voice trembled. "Even if that were true," he said, "there's no proof it harmed anyone." Jesus Christ's gaze softened, but his words did not. 34 children, he said, hospitalized over the last year, liver failure, kidney damage, ages 4 to 12. A breath was sucked in somewhere near the window. They lived near your plants. They ate your bread daily through school programs you secured with contracts and donations. "No," Graham whispered. "That's no." The doctors noticed the pattern. Jesus Christ continued. One of them tried to speak. Graham's head snapped up. He knew this part. He remembered the payment, the quiet meeting, the reassurance that the problem had been handled. "You paid him," Jesus Christ said, $200,000 to change the report, more to silence administrators, offshore transfers, clean, traceable. The CFO pressed his palms against his eyes. He could see the accounts in his mind, numbers he had helped move, convinced himself were normal business expenses. Graham's knees buckled. He gripped the back of his chair, breathing hard. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said weakly. Jesus Christ nodded. "Most poisoners don't," he replied. "They only mean to profit." The room felt smaller now. The glass walls offered no escape. Every executive understood the same terrible truth at the same time. This was not a moral lecture. It was exposure. "You gave cancer to your own body last," Jesus Christ said gently. "But first you gave it to others." Tears welled in Graham's eyes, not yet of repentance, but of terror. The empire he had built on precision and control was unraveling, not because of waste, but because of what he had hidden. Jesus Christ looked at the stones still resting on the table. "You asked me to turn stones into bread," he said, "but you already turned bread into stone, hard, lifeless, deadly." No one spoke, because everyone in the room understood now. The horror was not that bread had been thrown away. It was that bread meant to sustain life had been transformed into an instrument of death. The boardroom never officially adjourned, but it emptied as if fleeing a fire. Phones were silenced, doors closed too carefully, orders were given in whispers. By late afternoon, Graham Whitmore was no longer interested in explanations, only proof. If even a fraction of what had been spoken was true, he needed to see it with his own eyes. The drive took him far from glass towers and curated plazas into a stretch of industrial outskirts few executives ever visited. The air changed first. The smell of exhaust gave way to rot and chemical sweetness. Mountains rose on the horizon, not of stone but of waste. This was where the city sent what it didn't want to remember. The industrial landfill sprawled across acres, a scar carved into the earth. Trucks arrived in steady intervals, unloading their cargo with mechanical indifference. Among the debris were familiar shapes, plastic-wrapped bundles, split-open loaves spilling out crusts, catching the late sun like something still alive. Bread. Perfectly edible bread. Graham stepped out of his car and immediately regretted it. His shoes sank slightly into mud mixed with food and refuse. The stench hit hard. He covered his mouth not from disgust alone, but from something closer to panic. Then he saw them. At first they blended into the landscape, small figures moving carefully among the piles. But as his eyes adjusted, the shapes became people, families, children, bent backs and cautious hands sorting through what trucks had just dumped. They worked quickly, separating what could still be eaten from what was already spoiled. No one ran. No one begged. They moved with practiced efficiency, as if this were simply another shift. Near the center of it all stood a familiar figure. The man in white was there, not elevated, not commanding. He knelt beside a woman, helping her tie a sack. He lifted a loaf, examined it, and set it aside, not with disdain, but with care. Around him, people listened, trusted, followed. Graham's legs weakened. A woman looked up and froze when she recognized him. Her face hardened, not with rage, but with something worse, recognition, without surprise. "You," she said quietly. He searched his memory and found her name buried in old personnel files. She had worked at Plant 23, 12-hour shifts, terminated after asking for a raise. Her daughter stood beside her, now thin arms, clutching a piece of bread like a treasure. Others began to look up. A man with a limp, an older woman with flour still embedded in the lines of her hands. Voices murmured names, dates, locations. They had baked his bread, loaded his trucks, delivered his product, and now they scavenged what he ordered destroyed. "We didn't come here to steal," the woman said. "This is what's left for us." Graham opened his mouth, but nothing formed. The words he had mastered, policy, margins, efficiency, had no meaning here. The man in white rose slowly and turned to face him. There was no accusation in his eyes, only clarity. "These are not beggars," he said. "They are your workers, invisible to you once they were no longer useful." A child tugged at his sleeve and whispered something. He knelt, listened, then placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Graham watched the scene, his breath shallow, his chest tight. This was not a confrontation stage for cameras. There was no audience here, only truth. The landfill hummed with flies and distant engines. The city continued to consume and discard. But in this place, stripped of polish, in denial, the system revealed its final shape. This was the end of the supply chain. Not the warehouse, not the shelf. The people who lived off what had been deemed imperfect. And standing among them, feeding the invisible, was the one Graham had tried to humiliate hours earlier, quietly doing what no boardroom ever would. The transition was complete. The empire had followed him here, and there was no looking away. The child had been quiet the entire time, too quiet for someone her age. She stood close to her mother, small fingers gripping the edge of a torn sleeve, eyes dull with a tiredness no child should carry. When she shifted, her weight, pain flickered across her face, quick but unmistakable. Those who lived here recognized it immediately. Hunger did that. So did something worse. Jesus Christ noticed before anyone else said a word. He knelt until he was level with her, lowering himself into the filth without hesitation. The landfill's noise seemed to fade. The trucks, the shouts, the distant machinery, leaving only the sound of a shallow, uneven breath. "What hurts?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated, then pressed a hand to her stomach. "It always hurts," she whispered. "Even when I eat." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. She had learned not to cry in front of people like Graham Whitmore. Tears had never helped before, but here something in the air felt different, unsafe for lies, safe for truth. Doctors had used careful words: malnutrition, exposure, unknown complications. Tests were expensive. Appointments were months away. The system that made the bread had no space for the bodies it damaged. Jesus Christ placed his hand lightly over the child still resting on her abdomen. There was no urgency in his movement, no spectacle. He did not look toward Graham. He did not address the crowd that had gathered, drawn by instinct rather than curiosity. He closed his eyes. Those closest felt it first, not heat, not force, but warmth, steady and calm like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. It spread outward, quiet but undeniable. The child's breathing slowed. Her shoulders relaxed. The tension etched into her small frame began to loosen. Then she gasped, not in pain but surprise. "It doesn't hurt," she said, blinking. She straightened cautiously at first, then fully. Color returned to her face, subtle but real. Her eyes, once dim, caught the light. Her mother dropped to her knees, hands trembling, as she touched her daughter's cheeks, her arms, her stomach. "Say it again," she whispered. "Tell me again." "It doesn't hurt," the girl repeated louder now. She smiled hesitant, then wide, like someone rediscovering a forgotten skill. A murmur swept through the families. Someone crossed themselves. Someone else backed away, frightened not by what they saw, but by how deeply it reached. This was not medicine. This was not coincidence. Graham Whitmore stood frozen. He had watched mergers, close markets collapse, competitors fall. None of it prepared him for this. The system he built had reduced suffering to data points, liabilities, acceptable losses. And now before him, that suffering was undone not by policy, not by profit, but by compassion. Jesus Christ rose slowly, lifting the child into her mother's arms. "She is healed," he said simply. "But remember this." He turned not just to Graham, but to all of them. This pain did not come from nowhere. It came from choices, from systems that valued speed over safety, appearance over life. His gaze settled on Graham at last. "I healed her," he continued, "but I did not create her wound. You did." The words did not accuse. They clarified. Graham's knees buckled. He sank into the dirt, hands, shaking breath, ragged. Money had never failed him before. Influence had always opened doors. But here, faced with a child restored by a mercy he could neither buy nor control, his power meant nothing. The miracle was complete, not because a body was healed, but because the truth could no longer be denied. The miracle did not end the moment the child was healed. If anything, it sharpened the moment into something unavoidable. Graham Whitmore dropped to his knees in the dirt, the landfill's filth, staining his tailored suit. His breath came in short, uneven pulls, as if the ground itself were pressing the air from his chest. Around him, families watched in stunned silence. Some held their children closer. Others looked at him with an expression that carried no triumph, only witness. He lifted his head toward Jesus Christ, desperation stripping away the last layers of composure. "You can do it," Graham said hoarsely. "You can heal." His voice cracked. "Do it for me." The words tumbled out, now unguarded. "I'll give anything. Half my fortune. All of it. Whatever you want. Just make it stop." For the first time since arriving at the landfill, Jesus Christ did not answer immediately. He looked at Graham, not at the empire behind him, not at the wealth that had bent systems and people to its will, but at the man himself. Sick, afraid, cornered by truth. "You want your body healed," Jesus Christ said quietly. "Yes," Graham replied without hesitation. "Please." Jesus Christ nodded as if acknowledging something honest. Then he spoke again. "And what of your soul?" The question landed heavier than any diagnosis. Graham swallowed. "I'll change," he said quickly. "I'll donate more. I'll fix the policies. I'll set up foundations. I'll make it right." Jesus Christ knelt so they were eye level. "You are offering repairs," he said. "I am asking for surrender." Graham frowned, confused. "What does that mean?" "It means you cannot keep the throne." Jesus Christ replied, "Not part of it, not the illusion of control." He gestured around them to the families, the discarded bread, the child now laughing softly in her mother's arms. "You must return what you took, publicly, completely." Graham's breathing slowed, not with relief but calculation. "Confess," Jesus Christ continued. "Give back what was stolen: wages, health, dignity. Turn your factories into places that feed the hungry, not poison them. Accept the justice that comes with truth, even when it costs you everything." Graham stared at the ground. The words echoed in him like a sentence already pronounced. "That would destroy me," he whispered. Jesus Christ shook his head. "No, he said gently. It would save you. Silence stretched between them. The landfill buzzed back into awareness. The flies, the engines, the distant city that still did not know what was unfolding at its edge. Graham looked up again, eyes wet. Heal me first, he pleaded. Then I'll do it, I swear. Jesus Christ's expression did not harden. It saddened. That is not how love works, he said. I do not buy obedience with comfort. I do not trade miracles for promises. He placed a hand over Graham's chest directly above the heart. Your illness is not only here, he said, and I will not heal the flesh while the soul insists on staying sick. Graham felt it then, a moment of unbearable clarity. He could feel the path opening before him, narrow and costly. No loopholes, no negotiations, no private settlements. Only truth loss and the chance still real to be made new. His lips trembled. He wanted healing without exposure, mercy without consequence, salvation without surrender. Jesus Christ withdrew his hand and stood. The body can be healed in a moment, he said. The soul takes a choice. He turned back toward the families, toward the child whose life had been restored, without bargaining, without contracts. Behind him, Graham Whitmore remained on his knees, holding his chest, not yet healed, not yet condemned, but standing at the most expensive crossroads of his life. And the question lingered, heavier than disease. Was he willing to lose everything to be saved? The next morning, the city woke to headlines that moved faster than any miracle. Federal investigators arrived before sunrise, unannounced, coordinated, relentless. Search warrants were executed across Whitmore Bread Comir's headquarters, production plants, and satellite offices. Servers were seized, financial records unlocked, lab samples pulled from storage and rushed to independent testing facilities. By noon, regulators confirmed what had long been buried under signatures and certifications: illegal additives, falsified inspections, and a pattern of systemic poisoning hidden behind corporate polish. In America, justice does not descend as fire from heaven. It arrives as subpoenas, audits, indictments, and it does not negotiate with power. By the end of the week, Graham Whitmore's empire was frozen, accounts locked, assets seized, executives testified. Doctors and inspectors who had taken bribes were charged. Class action lawsuits followed parents, workers' communities demanding answers not from heaven, but from the courts. Graham Whitmore did not disappear. He surrendered. There were no speeches, no defiance, only a public confession, raw, shaking, undeniable. He admitted what had been done. He named names. He accepted responsibility. The sentence that followed stripped him of wealth, control, and status. Prison bars replaced glass towers. For the first time in decades, he ate the same food as everyone else and learned hunger of a different kind. Yet the story did not end in a cell. The seized bakeries were placed under a public trust. Production restarted, not for profit, but provision. Bread was made clean, distributed daily to shelter schools and food-insecure neighborhoods. Former workers were rehired with living wages and health care. The landfill families moved into housing. The child who had been healed returned to school laughing, growing alive. A plaque now hangs at the first factory entrance. It does not name Graham Whitmore. It reads, "Bread was meant to give life. When it became a weapon, justice answered. When truth was chosen, mercy followed." As for Jesus Christ, there were no sightings recorded, no footage recovered, only testimonies. A man in white at a hospital ward, a quiet figure at a soup kitchen, someone who listened when no one else did. Those who saw him never agreed on the details, but they agreed on the result. The proud were humbled, the poisoned were healed, and the invisible were finally seen. This is not a story about stones turned into bread. It is a story about hearts tested by truth. And now the question is yours. If the bread of life stood before you, asking not for words, not for promises, but for surrender, what would you choose? If this story moved you, challenged you, or stirred something in your heart, don't let it end here. Like this video, subscribe to Jesus Christ Encounters and share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because grace like truth is still moving.